Hello everyone, my name is Chrissy and welcome to my channel. This is the Your Readership Tag, which was originally done by Dalton from Strip Covered Lit, and I was tagged in the comments section of Rashmika's video when I said, this looks like a fun tag. She was like, you should do so. So I am doing so. There's just a few questions in this tag, so let's get into it. The first question is, who influenced your beginnings as a reader? And Dalton is very much right when he says most people will probably answer their parents. My mom was a very big influence in me becoming a reader, mainly because she read to me when I was very young, and she supported my need for books when I was in elementary, middle, and high school. The Scholastic Book Fair was one of the biggest perpetrators of this. When we would have the Scholastic Book Fair come to school, they'd give us those little pamphlets, those little magazines where you could order books from, and I'd bring it and I'd show my mom, please, please. And she would have me just circle 5 books. I'd always try to circle all of them, but she would say I have to pick 5, and she would buy me those books every year that the Scholastic Book Fair came around. So I'm very grateful to her that she did that for me and cherished this love of books I had. So thanks, Mom. The other people who influenced my reading are actually my oldest friends. One of them I have read so many fantasy books with, and we would talk about them. We'd have heartbreaks over the characters together, and it was really nice to have someone to talk about reading with. So I think having someone who shares that kind of passion with you really helps spur that love that you have. So the love of reading was very much fostered between the friendships that I had. So those are the main people who influenced my reading. Number 2 is, what is the first book you remember? If I actually just went off of what's the first books that I think I read when I was young, it's the Berenstain Bears, and I only really know that because my parents, I think, still have some of my books in storage. So one of the first books I remember that I read and checked out the book, and I read more than once, is Adam of the Road by Elizabeth Gray Vining, and it's just about this kid and his Cocker Spaniel who travel back in olden years. That's all I can remember about it. But I loved that book at the time, and I had checked it out multiple times. I think I was in 5th grade when this happened. That was one of the books that really spurred my reading. Another one that I remember reading from back in that time period is The Phantom Tollbooth. Loved that book as well. Question number 3 is, what is the first book that impacted you? I don't know if you guys remember the Redwall series by Brian Jacques. That whole series impacted me at the time, the amount of books that were out, and there were still quite a lot of them. I think there was over 10 at the time I was a teenager. But the Redwall series was one of my first forays into high fantasy, oddly enough. It had mice as the main characters, but it was still my foray into high fantasy. I loved those books. I was so drawn into the world, and oh my gosh, Legend of Luke was one of my favorite books of all times. I was hooked. I read some of those books multiple times. I think I read Legend of Luke about 5 or 6 times. They were heavily influenced to me for fantasy. It's weird because I feel like I should say Lord of the Rings, but I didn't read Lord of the Rings until I was in my late teens, early 20s. But I remember reading in middle school Redwall by Brian Jacques, and my brother calling it the rodent books. I defended those rodent books with my life. I loved them so much. I miss them to this day. I kind of want to reread some of those books and just really take a gander into young Christina's mind at that time. Number 4, what author was your first love? Brian Jacques. Yeah, Brian Jacques was one of my first authors that I read all of his works that came out, really. When he would have a new series in the Redwall, I was right there getting it. I was just constantly reading his stuff, and I was just so interested in this world. He's the one who really got me into series. He's the one who got me into long series that just pulled me in. Because otherwise, the only other book series that I was in at the time, besides Harry Potter, was Animorphs. And Animorphs I read on a constant basis as well. Catherine Applegate and Brian Jacques were some of my first loves as far as authors go, and when I was really young. If I talk about my adult reading, it would have to be Terry Pratchett. When I got into Terry Pratchett's Discworld series, I love it to pieces. There's still books I haven't read, which shame on me because I love Terry Pratchett, and I need to get all the series and just plow through them because there's such a great world building. I loved when he teamed up with Neil Gaiman to write Good Omens. Love that book as well. It's so good. So good. Number 5, what is one book that has been on your TBR far too long? There's more than one, but the one I picked out is because I think I got this about 10 years ago. I just haven't gotten around to it. It's Dracula by Bram Stoker. And it's not that I'm dreading reading it. I just haven't gotten to it. I think because I look at it, I'm like, you've been around for so long, you can wait more years. It's like, you've been on my shelves before, you're not going anywhere. But like Dracula has been on my shelves for a long time. There's also Les Miserables. I've had that for a while. There's Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. I've had that. I also have The Three Musketeers, which is Chunky Monkey Boy. But I have a lot of classics that I do want to get to, but admittedly, I'm not the biggest fan of the writing styles of classics. I'm just not. They're hard for me to get through. I will read them eventually because I want to see what's in them. I want to experience a story for myself, but they're not my most favorite as far as styles of writing go. And I know I'm lumping in a lot of classics, even though they've been published many, many, many years apart. But, you know. Number 6 is, what is your go-to suggestion for a new reader? That so depends on what it is that they like just in their general lives. Because if it's nonfiction and if they're into things like true crime and serial killers, then Devil in the White City is a great one to go to. If they're into things like urban fantasy, then I would actually point them to a fantasy detective type novels. So, for example, Jim Butcher's Dresden Files, I think would be a really good start for them. And I've heard it's okay to start like the 3rd book into the Dresden Files series and you're not missing too much. So if we're talking about someone who likes sci-fi, and especially if they watch Star Trek, then I'd say Red Shirts by John Scalzi. So yeah, it just depends. It depends on what it is that that person likes. If they like classics, I'd probably recommend one of the smaller classics, like A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens. So number 7 is, how has literature influenced you? It's hard for me to think of just literature influencing me. Reading has caused me to want to write my own stories. It has caused me to want to see if I can create my own plots, my own characters, and delve into my own worlds and put it on paper. But I think that reading has impacted me in ways of how to view others. I think it's given me a lot of empathy for other people, because when you read, you see the lives of others and the situations that they go through, and that people, if you think of them as characters in books, then you realize that they probably have so much going on in their own lives. So it's really caused me to be more compassionate towards other people, that they could be going through so much and that I don't know all of their plot lines. So thinking about it like that, I feel like I can have a better understanding of those around me and why people do the things that they do. So that's really what I got for that. Sorry, it's probably not the best answer in the world. But that's the Your Readership Tag. If you like this video, hit that thumbs up. If you like seeing this face talk about books, hit that subscribe button. And as always and forever, may you get lost in a book.